Welcome to the official Erdos podcast, where we spend our non-productive time talking about everything drilling tech and getting the latest insight from industry leaders on our show. I'm Ken Miller.
And I'm David Erdos, and today we brought on a good friend, Dave Harry from Drillers Directional up in Edmonton, Canada.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being brave enough to join us. I know we can be an intimidating bunch.
I'm not worried.
So, Dave, tell us a bit about, your path to the industry. We always love to hear how people got into the industry, and I'm sure the people on the podcast are tired of hearing my path because I think I keep sharing it every time someone shares theirs. But how did you get into this fun little industry we're all in?
Well, I started off going to post-secondary school. I was NAIT, Northern Alberta Institute of Technology here in Edmonton. Once I graduated, the allure of the oil patch is pretty strong, mainly the money. And getting the fancy new truck is always a good thing too. So my brother was already in the industry working for a company called Sperry Sun. They were actually just recently bought at the time by Halliburton. So I spent about a year working in the city and then decided that, I could probably handle some of the oil patch money. So I got hired on with Sperry Sun back in 2001. So that makes this 20 years of directional experience for me now. I spent about 6-7 years there working in the field, doing projects anywhere from southeast Saskatchewan up to northeast BC, all through Alberta, working on several different tool systems that they had at the time. From there, I jumped over. It was a new startup company called Departure. A few of the guys from Sperry Sun started another directional company. I think that was in 2007, I believe. Jumped over with them and helped them get that company running. Partway through my time there, I eventually moved into the office and started taking on some of the roles of coordinator, and I spent a lot of time in the shop as well. Their philosophy there was that we would integrate coordinating with maintenance of tools. Therefore, you kind of take that roadblock out so that the guys that are coordinating also have an in-depth knowledge of the tools, and hence the troubleshooting and stuff like that gets that much better when you actually service the tools and have a good idea of what's going on with them. So that's pretty good there. I learned a lot from the guys there. They had a ton of experience, but unfortunately they eventually sold to a little company called Ensign, and I'm not much for big companies after my experience with Halliburton. So I opted out of that and went out, just kind of freelanced for a little bit, and then eventually found Drillers Directional, and I was actually working in the field again. So once I started on with Drillers Directional, then they were a new startup at the time as well. I think once they saw that I had the experience of coordinating and a lot of the shop technician stuff and stuff like that, they eventually decided that I'd be a good fit for a role in the office in a management position. So that's how I ended up becoming the manager here at Drillers Directional for the MWD department. So
nice.
That's the background.
Fantastic questions come out of that. I as well do not work well with big companies. I don't think I'd last 6 weeks inside of a big company anymore. I think I'd lose my mind. Like, I am not somebody you want to have employed at a 100,000 person organization or whatever, right? I agree. I spent 4 years working for Texas Instruments, and I learned a lot. But one of my favorite moments from TI was we had a brand new tester, for the semiconductors that we were bringing online, and this is what really made me want to start one of the things that led to me wanting to start my own company and run things really efficiently was we had a tester. It was not working. We had, 10, 12 engineers, PhDs or whatever on the line from probably 3 p.m. in the afternoon till about 7 p.m., right? It's all getting late. We haven't made any progress. Everybody's trying everything out, right? And I'm sitting here going God, what is the amount of money we're burning per minute here on the phone? I'm just doing that calculation on the side while I listen to these guys. And I've written some test software that's for the tester, and that's why I'm on the call. And finally, one of these PhDs at the end goes, did you plug it in? And the guy's like, he goes, "Oh, that does it. Thanks, guys."
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's
I
a
was
good
like,
one.
"Oh, you're kidding me. I just wasted like 5 hours of my life and like 50, 60, 70 hours down the drain there, right?"
Yeah.
Well, I have to ask, could you compare and contrast for us, like, what is it like, from your perspective of like what Sperry had back in the day, I guess, because they're always kind of legendary for having really good tools and service compared to like what the independent technology groups have to offer today, right? Like, what's the biggest differences in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit of the background with Sperry. I mean, when I first started with them, they were a well-run company. I honestly thought they were the only directional company in the game. Like that's. I mean, I had no idea what a tensor tool was until like 2007. So yeah, I mean, it was well run, and the equipment was all built in house. So of course, anything that goes wrong with that equipment, you get instant feedback direct to the engineers that know how to either fix it or make it better. So I mean, you can imagine the advancements in the system when everything is done in house like that. Obviously being a big company, there was certain things that held back certain advancements and stuff like that. There was always the bean counters, so to speak, that, wouldn't let you run away with stuff. But yeah, I mean, it was, really good tools. The MTBF there was just amazing. Once this, with the right people involved on the operations side, that equipment just ran flawlessly and so much more advanced than the stuff we even run today, battery management, things like that, with the feedback that they got and stuff. It was just amazing. I still compare the tools that I ran back then to what some of the tools today should be like. The third-party industry is obviously catching up leaps and bounds now, which is nice to see. But yeah, that's all I can say is that it was excellent equipment back in the day, just because it was done in-house. So yeah,
I love that tight feedback cycle. But what's been really interesting to me is I mean, if you look even at the majors today, I mean, there's some, you can make some argument that they're kind of struggling to keep up with technology, right? And so anybody who's tried to have, service and technology under one roof, it's been a big challenge, right? And nobody's been able to really keep it consistently ahead of the game for a long time. And even kind of see Schlumberger starting to fade in that respect, right? Becoming less competitive in the independent industry. And I don't know if I'm just talking bullshit because that's what I hope is going on or whatever, but
yeah, notice I said back in the day, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Definitely
right?
changed lately. And I mean, since my brother was still over there, or, he just got laid off last year with all these slowdowns up here, but he was telling me that they were starting to adopt some of the third-party stuff at Sperry Sun. I'm like, what? Like, since when does Sperry go out and find tools from third-party vendors? And I was just shocked. So yeah, I mean, this is back in the day, obviously. So,
well, but you might find some parallel even to the semiconductor industry, because there was really big news this week in the semiconductor industry that Intel replaced their CEO. They're falling behind, AMD and ARM and Apple and everybody else with all these processors.
Mm-hmm.
Hell has already frozen over twice now. I mean, Apple went from, 2 Intel processors, and now they're making their own processor that's the fastest, as opposed to the Mac being really nice but slow, right? And so, but even Intel now is looking like they're going to start outsourcing some of their production, right? And so forever it's been, you design the semiconductors and you fabricate them under the same roof, and that trend started tearing apart 10 years ago, and now it's kind of culminating with Intel looking like they're going to go that direction. And so you even see some sort of, separation of the company's responsibilities, there, right? Service and technology, chip design and fabrication. And it's just really interesting to wonder if there isn't some parallel there, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's, I think a lot of it is how the ship is being steered, obviously. I mean, some of these big companies, they're just not run properly, and they lose sight of what's important. I mean, you're going through your big company story, and I was thinking of mine is, we were having an operations meeting, or we're supposed to have an operations meeting first thing Monday morning, and part of that's always a safety moment, and we're in the safety moment, and we're getting calls because we've got problems on the rig, and we're talking about choking babies. I mean, that's horrible. Like, I don't want to see babies choke any more than the next person. I want to know what to do about it. But I think we should probably answer the phone and deal with our customers' problems before we worry about this topic, right? So, I mean, the big companies, they lose sight of what's important, and what's important is to deliver a good product to their customers. So I think that's what I'm seeing more and more with these big companies is they're losing sight, and other companies that are focused on delivering good products are getting ahead leaps and bounds. So
no, I fully agree with you. The top leadership in the company has to have a product focus. Come on, Dave. Tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's so important, like you mentioned early on with Sperry's Son, where the engineers had direct feedback from the field. Having that direct feedback loop between the field and the engineers, we found is so critical. If there's like an in-between layer, it just slows down everything, and there's additional confusion and
complexity. But it's so much more than that, right? Because so much of human communication is nonverbal, right? It's body language, it's how you say something, it's the inflection or whatever else that you use, right? And so when there's someone like that goes, out and talks to the field, and then there's a layer of communication in between the engineers and the field like that, even if you just transcribe exactly the words that are said, so much is lost, right? Like if the engineers can hear directly what's going on, I mean, they can learn so much more, and there's so much more insight, and there's this natural human ability to capture and infer a lot more information when you hear it from the source, right? It's like, it's worse than a game of telephone, right? Because it's not even like the words are getting lost like the game of telephone teaches you, but it's just so much worse than that, because you're missing out on so much communication that was never transcribed in the first place, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just that, it's the impression you're leaving on the people that you're working with as well. I mean, just motivation comes from seeing the person above you work just as hard as you do, right? And being involved and they're dealing with the same problems. So, there's so many levels that are missed out on if a company's not steered the proper way and management doesn't take that upon themselves to be involved.
So I really appreciate what Elon Musk said the other day, which was, we've had way too many MBAs get a hold of companies and start running them from the numbers, right? And so I couldn't agree with that more, right? I think that one of the things that pissed me off when I got into entrepreneurship was I read a whole bunch of articles, and they're saying, oh yeah, the best thing for a company to do is, after the founder gets it up and running, it's really the best thing to replace them with a professional CEO. And I'm like, no, that sounds like a terrible idea. Like that sounds like the worst idea you could possibly imagine. But I kept reading that over and over and over again in business textbooks, and I just utterly emotionally rejected that. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure it's more important for like the founder to figure out how to become a good CEO after they figure out how to get the damn thing running, right? And luckily, I think the whole business world is kind of coming around to that, right? And kind of thinking that that's actually the better way to do things, and kind of losing some of that, bad habits of the past, right?
Yeah.
So I couldn't help it. You talked about the company that you went to work for after Sperry. That was the Sperry expat startup. They tried this combined coordinator, tool service mindset. How did that go, like overall?
It was excellent. I mean, the tools we were running at the time were the pilot, basically the Blue Star tools, and I really admire the guys that were running the MWD side of that. They're basically my mentors, and why I became what I did in the industry is because of seeing them work. And just the basic philosophies that they had were excellent. One of them being that every problem needs an answer and a fix. So no matter how small the issue, there's always a reason why it happened is provided, and then some sort of fix for it, so we make some sort of modification to the tools, and fleet wide. I mean, I remember spending many nights there just trying to, we'd find a major issue, and it was priority one to upgrade the entire fleet to make sure that we had that fixed so that we didn't see that problem reoccur anytime soon. That was just one of the great philosophies. And the other one, like we touched on, was just having coordinators out turning around tools. I mean, what a great idea. It seems like it's beneath a coordinator to spend his time servicing tools, but you know what, when problems arise and they're thinking of ways to come, for solutions to fix issues in the field, having an in-depth knowledge of those tools is just, it puts you above the rest when it comes to trying to figure out what the issues are. And not only that, a lot of problems are just stupid little problems like, hey, can you check if that O-ring was on there, or did you remember to check this setting on the tool or whatever, and have, field experience alone does not make a good coordinator. A good coordinator needs to be rounded completely out with the maintenance side of things as well. And I think that I haven't worked for too many MWD companies, but that's I don't think that's entirely true for a lot of people that coordinate. I think a lot of coordinators just come right in out of the field and are expected to do their job without any real understanding of how the tool works in depth. So,
no, that's a fantastic point, and it's going to sound a little arrogant, but I kind of feel like that if you feel like anything's beneath you, you're probably doing something wrong, right? Like, it's one thing to like know that you're capable of more and that you could do a whole lot better, but like to think that something is just not, I mean, I'm all for being efficient with your time, right? But like, you got to have the CEO, we'll sleep the fours if you have to kind of mindset, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and having that in-depth understanding, I think, for at least at a system level within the organization is critical for like brainstorming and troubleshooting and finding solutions to the problems that do come up.
If I had it my way, I'd even have, the techs in the shop spend time in the field. Mm-hmm. I actually like it when there's a technician that has some field experience. They always seem to make the best technicians, because when you do get troubleshooting, or they just see things that, because they understand how the tools are being used, and then when they're servicing them, they catch things that wouldn't necessarily be looked at by a guy that really has no understanding or of how the tools are used downhole, or how they're built, or how they're treated, or any of that. So it's just company-wide involvement in all aspects is important. So but mainly for the and then again the field hands coming and spending some time in the shop too. I think a lot of companies do that. I hope they do. But definitely I like to have my field technicians come and spend some time in servicing tools and seeing the insides of the tools. I hire a lot of guys that have worked at other companies that say that they've, I'll roll out to the field to do some sort of modification, and I'll crack open a barrel and well, I've never seen the inside guts of that thing before, right? Like, you're a 10-year hand and you've never seen an electronics package like opened up. You've only looked at beryllium tubes your entire career. Wow. That's
a little,
so.
That's a little, I'm really glad you said that, sending everybody out to the field, because we actually have we were joking about like getting a school bus or something, because we're sending even our software developers and everybody else out to the rig now, so they can really get that hands-on experience. And we believed in that for a long time. We believed in that back when I worked at Teledrill, and we hired this young kid out of college to be our IT guy. And even though like he was never going to have any responsibility whatsoever, as far as designing the tools or whatever else, he was just there to manage the IT for the company. And we still wanted him to have rig experience and understand what it is we're up against, right? Mm-hmm. And it was really hilarious. We brought him out to the rig, and he went up to the rig floor with brand new boots on. Brand spanking new boots, and it was a Pemex rig. It was a bunch of guys but I don't even think the guys spoke English, right? They all had the Pemex kind of FRs on and everything, and they thought the clean boots were the funniest thing in the world, and they grabbed a big old thing of pipe dope and just rubbed it on his boots.
The clean hard hats are always good. I always warn you. We haven't brought anybody new into the industry in a long time, but when we were bringing green hands in, I think back at Departure was the last time we hired guys right out of school and stuff like that. And I'd always take their hard hat and I'd just kind of scuff it up a little for them, and they'd be like, "Oh, why are you doing that?" And I'm like, "Don't worry, I'm doing you a favor. I'm wrecking your hard hat for a reason. Like you're safer this way."
Yeah.
So
that's pretty funny. I have a secret to getting around that, which is I just forget my hard hat every time and have to bum it from somebody else, and I'll get a nasty, sweaty, sticker-filled hard hat.
You look like you've been working on the rigs for 20 years when you borrow a hard hat. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, all the stickers on it and stuff, and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm really curious. Were the tools that you ran with Sperry Sun easier to run? You mentioned reliability was excellent, but what about like ease of use? How was that on those tools versus today's tools?
Yeah, I think some of their legacy stuff, like their pulse tool, wasn't the easiest to run. The reliability was excellent on it, but the technology was older, right? So it required more maintenance and things like that. It was a turbine-driven pulse tool. But yeah, you had to know what you're doing. I mean, it's not like the tensor tools these days where, you know, pretty much anybody can run them and everybody's familiar with them in some aspect. You throw one of the old Sperry pulse tools in front of somebody today and they're going to be lost. You have to have a technical background to work on those tools.
Yeah, it seems like the amount of technical expertise and training required for, you know, tools, you know, back in the day or, you know, at these big companies seems to be so much higher than some of these modern tools where you're getting field hands, you know, with very little training and they have to get up to speed on whatever's handed to them very quickly.
But yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's just the way technology is in general too, right? I mean, you know, to own a vehicle 35 years ago took a lot more hands-on effort than it does these days. So it's kind of the same way. You know, you just have to, you know, technology makes life easier. That's what it comes down to. So
I did want to go back
to when you don't have to rely on the guys, you know, and let's face it, human error is always going to be there. If you can take that away, then you're going to have more reliable tools yet. So, but you know, they were rugged tools. They were meant to last for sure.
I want to go back to something you said about the failures, right? And even like one little thing requiring, you know, a fix and an explanation. And, you know, I've seen this time and time again to where, you know, most MWD companies, they keep a spreadsheet or something of the failure modes, right? And so the basic idea is, you know, group the most common failure modes, sort the list, see what's the worst, tackle it in priority order, right? And, you know, I think a big thing everybody's kind of missing there is, you know, most of the time, your little one-off failures make up like 40 or 50% of your overall failures, right? Your next biggest failure mode is maybe like 10% of the failures, right? And and those one-off failures always get sorted to the bottom of the spreadsheet, right? Because it's just one or two, right? Compared to all the other ones. And I think ignoring those and putting them to the last priority in the bottom is the absolute wrong way to think about it. I think what you should do is kind of lump all those together, consider those failures that come from inconsistent service or inconsistent, you know, servicing of the tools or service in the field or whatever, and say, guys, like, we got to find a way to make our organization work more consistently, better processes, all that kind of stuff, like, and tackle that big bucket first. I mean, because let's be honest, like the ones like, oh, my driver fails all the time. Okay, well, that's an easy solution, right? Just go work with a driver manufacturer and figure out what the hell's failing. Like that one, those always have straightforward answers, right? Like make it stronger, make it a little bit better, right? Like it's the one-offs, it's that big group of miscellaneous stuff that really is the hardest to solve and takes the absolute most creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think sometimes people look at those the wrong way as well. Sometimes it's not a very hard fix. Just a case in point is on one particular job, we had the poppet tip, the servo poppet tip in the pulsar had unscrewed, right? And, you know, it's funny because I'd never ever seen that before in all the years that I've done this. And it must have just taken either maybe it was assembled wrong, but I don't think so because we double check everything, or it was just some weird harmonic that and maybe a bit of stick slip in the mass of the carbide poppet tip on that tiny little thread managed to wiggle loose, and then it unspun, and then of course we had a failure because of it. And I think there's some companies out there that might look at that and go, that was a fluke, that'll never happen again, you know, we're not going to change that. But in reality, it's a simple procedural or just a change in a new revision of poppet and poppet tip down the line, right? So maybe it won't happen again right away, but in the short term, we can make a quick procedural change and use a stronger Loctite in that solution. And we just change that across the board. And then down the line, we actually just make a parts revision change and we go to a stronger thread, a beefier thread. I mean, how hard is that to do? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not going to cost a lot of money to make a procedural change, but why wouldn't we change something? Like, why would we just say, oh, that was a fluke, and change nothing about the way we do things? We're not going to act that way.
Just my own personal experience. Like I develop a lot of software and have throughout my career, and every single time, and I hate talking in absolutes because there's almost no absolutes in this life, but I feel like this is one. Every time I ignore a little bug and think, you know what, that was a fluke, it probably won't come back to bite me. It comes back to bite me every single time. And so I've just had to really learn to look for like any little anomaly in my software operation and go like, okay, there's something there. There's something there that's got to get fixed, or it's just going to keep coming back, because it's never just gone away, Yeah. So I think that that speaks a lot to the topic becoming unscrewed. A fluke, I don't know. This industry sure is full of flukes, right?
Yeah, maybe a fluke on that rig, but then you go down to the next rig and that fluke happens every single run, and you have a back-to-back-to-back failure because you didn't address it on the one time it happened before. So, yeah, I think, and I looked at the tools that we had at Departure, and they were so reworked. I wouldn't even call them Blue Star tools by the time that we got through with them. Towards the end, when we were buying a new Blue Star tool, the first thing we had to do was take it apart and rebuild it to our specifications. So, I mean, we're taking brand new tools and sending them out for remachining on half the parts, and then installing new parts in it, and just doing things that all the hard lessons we learned, we had to do all those upgrades. And you know what? It wasn't expensive though. It's just maybe like $500 worth of machining and add-on parts, but boy, oh boy, did it make those tools 10 times more reliable. It was just amazing the little things that we could do to increase the reliability of that pulser. So.
Well, and I hate to keep analogizing, mechanical devices that are undergoing extreme pressures, extreme temperatures, extreme forces with software, but I keep finding parallels, right? And so, I mean, in software, if you're off by one bit, right? I mean, you're done. Like you might as well be it's an inch or the distance from here to the moon. It doesn't matter. You're still just as equally screwed, right? And so, if you guys are making a modification that makes that pulser reliable, well, I mean, yeah, it's a cheap, simple little modification, but it's the last little inch, right? And it's, it's all or nothing. It's absolutely all or nothing, right? And so that's what makes it work, makes the tool reliable, makes your service work, right? And so I totally get that. So Dave, the last thing I kind of want to wrap up on is, I was hoping to compare and contrast a little bit about like traditionally what, the differences have been between the U.S. and the Canadian oil field, right? And so maybe there's not much difference, and maybe they'll discover a little bit of difference, but I've always been a little bit curious, right? Because my experience in Canada has been pretty limited.
Yeah, I mean, and my experience in the U.S. is a bit limited too. So, I mean, it's, I guess the big thing, I mean, obviously the cycle, down in the U.S., you don't see as much of a cycle, like a yearly cycle of rig activity and stuff like that. This is pretty common knowledge up here. And I think even a lot of the guys in the States understand this too, is that up here we have what's called a breakup. Basically, a lot of the northern areas are in areas where it's like, we call it muskeg. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but the muskeggy areas where it's basically just big lakes, so like sloughs and stuff like that. And they're just, hundreds of square kilometers of this in northern Alberta. Yet there's really good oil plays under them and stuff, right? So, I mean, you can't move a rig over these areas unless you wait for it to freeze up. So that's what it's based on. We wait for everything to freeze up. We get as many rigs into areas that we normally can't access as we can. And then we go like crazy while everything's frozen. And then we try and pull it all out of there before it all melts. They make ice roads and things like that and get all this stuff out. Like if you make an ice road, it can last right into, April and, I wouldn't say May. Usually breakup is done by the end of April. But, we pull all that equipment out as quickly as we can and any way we can. Sometimes they get left in there. Like if they really want to get a hole drill, the rig will get stuck in an area for the entire summer because they can't move it out of there. So, You know, and I think that's probably the biggest difference between the Canadian oil patch and the U.S. market is that, you know, there's not much of a cycle down there. I've heard that, you know, sometimes in the winters, maybe it slows down in the States a little bit. Maybe I'm off on that, or maybe it picks up a little bit there as well. I don't know.
I think the activity here is entirely based on the price of oil and not the time of day.
Yeah,
or anything.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, and oil prices doing not as horrible right now, but I mean, still every January 1st, every year, our rig count doubles. And I think it tripled this year, which is still not saying much. It's still way under par. But the activity always goes up in the winter, and that's the reason why. You know, that's pretty simple.
I got a lot of exposure to the river crossing HED industry. You know, municipal drilling are all kind of things that's called by. And one of the wildest things to me was that they only worked from like 12-hour shifts, 7 to 7 or something, unless there was like an extreme case, or sometimes like they'd flip over and they work during the nights, but not the days. And it was just so weird. Like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock rolls around, they start shutting everything down, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to the hotel for the night." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, we're drilling, right? Like, what do you mean we're going to stop? This makes no sense."
Yeah, it's
different world.
One of my observations was I felt like when I went up to Canada that the rigs were run much more like, and forgive the analogy, but like it felt like there was like a much clearer command structure, and that the command structure was a lot more formal and more like run like a naval ship or something. Like, at least that was my impression, versus just a bunch of cowboys. And there's one lead cowboy that's in charge down here in the States, right? And, you know, it's funny. I remember one of the first times I was on a Canadian rig, we were trying to get into the company man shack and to sign in or whatever. And I was coming in and I tripped over the door frame and I accidentally slammed the door to the company man's trailer, right? And all of the guys that had brought me on that rig, they looked at me like I had just done something absolutely horrible. And I like froze in my spot, like waiting to get yelled at or whatever. We all just kind of stood perfectly still, like little kids who got caught doing something bad, waiting for our dad to yell at us or something. And luckily it didn't wake them up, but like they were scared shitless that slamming door was going to wake the cutting man up and we were all going to be screwed. You know, like they're like, Ken, if that guy got woken up, like you might have just been off this site. Like that's how bad that was going to be.
Yeah, it can definitely, you know, I mean, I'm not sure how it is down there, but I mean, yeah, I mean, all the guys are working double shifts and they have 50-50 shacks where there's one guy sleeping, one guy working. So it's always the polite thing to do to lightly knock on the door, poke your head in, and then, yeah, the doors are always shut super quietly. So yeah, you gotta be extra careful. And as far as the command structure and stuff like that, yeah, it's, I like the way it's run. It was a bit more cowboyish, like you say, when I first got into the industry. But lately, it's like a well-oiled machine out there. I think that the rig crews take their jobs pretty seriously. They're you know, one thing I did notice is, you know, because with Departure, we did set up some operations down in Casper, Wyoming, and stuff, and I noticed that just the people themselves that are working in the various positions, you know, like we get graduates and stuff taking on MWD jobs. Like, I mean, I've got post-secondary. Most of the guys working for me have some form of post-secondary, stuff like that. Like it's a career that's taken pretty seriously. Whereas in the States, you know, like I'm like, well, why don't we go to the local college and hire guys out of college or something like that for MWD positions? And they're just like, no, we don't put guys like that to work on the rigs and stuff. And I was kind of shocked that, you know, just the level of the people that are working out on the rigs is a different kind of mentality. You know, like it's we do get graduates and stuff like that out in these positions. So yeah, unfortunately, it does tend to be that way down here. I'll tell you one of the most important lessons I learned working up there was I learned the value of laceless steel toes. Because when you're surrounded by snow and you're trying to tie your freaking shoes, you know, on and off to get in and out of those trailers, it was miserable. And so, you know, I got my cowboy boots now that have the steel toes and no laces, and that made life much easier. Yeah, like either big Dunlop boots or rubber boots or cowboy boots or whatever it is. You can't, especially as an MWD hand, when you're in and out of that shack, constantly setting up equipment and testing on the computers. And yeah, I mean, you need basically slip-on shoes to get in and out of those shacks as much as you do with the weather and stuff. And our locations can get pretty muddy, and the oil companies are better and better at making sure the locations stay cleaned up and try and keep them as nice as possible. But there's always going to be mud and snow up here. It's like all the time.
You can't control the weather that well, man.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we envy your winter, but we do envy your summers a little.